Good morning, afternoon, or evening, cats and dogs. Today's video focuses on the Lesson 6.5 guided notes on solving more two-step equations that are containing grouping symbols, which are parentheses in this case. So I want to start with a short distributive property review. There are 3 questions at the bottom of this slide that involve using the distributive property to rewrite each of the following expressions. So let's remember how to do these. In problem number 1, we've got 5 and then in parentheses x plus 9. Since we are going to see some equations that contain parentheses, we need to be able to rewrite this without parentheses. So remember that we need to distribute the 5 into the parentheses and multiply the 5 by the x and also by the 9. So we can write this as 5 times x plus 5 times 9. Keep in mind that that simplifies to 5x plus 45. I would expect that at this point, you should be able to skip the yellow highlighted step and go right to the 5x plus 45. So go through this yellow highlighted step mentally. 5 times x gives us 5x, 5 times 9 gets us 45. Let's give number 2 a try. The difference here is the subtraction inside the parentheses. You can choose to add the opposite from the beginning, or you can do it at the end, or not do it at all. So for this question, we are going to distribute the 3 into the parentheses. So we're going to take 3 times y and 3 times 6. So we're going to have 3 times y minus 3 times 6. Again, I do expect that you can probably skip this step and get a final solution of 3y minus 18. All right, let's try number 3. Let's distribute this negative 2 into the parentheses. So we are going to do negative 2 times b and negative 2 times 5. So you will have negative 2 times b plus negative 2 times 5. That will simplify to negative 2b plus negative 10. All right, let's take a look at some examples of solving equations that contain grouping symbols. What you'll want to do is get rid of the parentheses first by distributing, then solve the equation just like a regular two-step, or maybe more than 2 steps for some of these, but in general like a regular 2-step equation. So number 4, I have 8 and then in parentheses g minus 3. Now I did choose to add the opposite at the beginning for this, but again, you could maybe wait to do it or not do it at all. But I added the opposite. I distribute the 8. 8 times g is 8g. 8 times negative 3 is negative 24. So we get 8g plus negative 24, or minus 24, equals 24. Now, just use your inverse operations like before. The inverse of adding negative 24 is to add a positive 24. 24 plus 24 gets us 48. So we have 8g equals 48. Now it's a one-step equation. Divide both sides by 8 to get your final solution of g equals 6. All right, let's try question number 5. Let's distribute this 5 into the parentheses. So take 5 times x and 5 times 3. That will get us 5x plus 15 equals 25. Now it's just a two-step equation. The inverse of adding 15 is to subtract 15. So let's subtract 15 from both sides. That's going to leave us with 5x equals 25 minus 15, which is 10. Now we're going to divide both sides by 5, which is the inverse of multiplying by 5, and that will get us x equals 2 for our solution. Now we can check our solutions for these as well. Typically what I will do is I will do the stuff in parentheses and then multiply by the number outside as my last step. So what I suggest is do 2 plus 3, hit equals to find that solution, then multiply by 5. My calculator gives me 25. That's the number that's on the right-hand side. You could, of course, plug all of this in. 5 times in parentheses, 2 plus 3, end parentheses, hit equals. It also gets us 25. But remember, you can check these just like we did our 1 and 2 step equations. All right, in number 6, we want to distribute this 7 into the parentheses. So 7 times 2c and 7 times 5. That will get us 14c minus 35, since 7 times 5 is 35, and 7 times 2c is 14c. Now, inverse operations. The inverse of subtracting by 35 is to add by 35. If you feel the need to write what's happening to the variable in the inverse when you get to a two-step equation like this, you can still do so, but I think we can probably get away from having to show that additional work. So add 35 to both sides. We will get 14c equals 42. That's 7 plus 35. divide both sides by 14, and we will end up getting 3 for our solution. Again, the way I would check this, I do 2 times 3 to get 6, minus 5 is 1. 1 times 7 gets me 7. All right, let's try a couple more. So number 7, let's go ahead and distribute this -2 into the parentheses. Keep in mind, it's not a bad idea to pause the video at any time if you need to catch up with writing any of this work down. So be careful with this. -2 times y is -2y, minus -2 times 3 is a -6. Now, I would strongly suggest you rewrite this as -2y plus 6. It just makes our work a little bit easier. You could have added the opposite from the beginning, and then you would still get -2y plus 6. Now, the inverse of adding by 6 is to subtract 6. 22 minus 6 is going to get us 16. Now divide both sides by -2. The solving two-step equation should be starting to get pretty routine for you. We'll get -8 equals y, or y equals -8. All right, let's try number 8. This one is going to get us a decimal for a solution, and that's just to show you that we can get decimals as our answer or fractions as our answer as well. It doesn't always have to be a whole number. Sometimes I have students who think, well, I got a decimal, it can't be right, and perhaps it is, or they try to find a way that's going to get them an integer or a whole number, and that's not always the right way to do the problem. So let's distribute this 6 into the parentheses. 6 times b and 6 times 4. So that's going to be 6b plus 24 equals -15. Now remember, the more steps we have, the more places you can make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. Just make sure you show as much work as possible and you have a pretty good understanding of how to do these problems. Mistakes will happen, but it's also why we want to double check our solutions at the end. The inverse of adding by 24 is to subtract 24. -15 minus 24 is -39. So we have 6b equals -39. Now we want to divide both sides by 6. -39 divided by 6, depending on your calculator, is probably going to give you a decimal. It will be -6.5. Now, if you have -6.5, that's okay. -13.5, some of your calculators might give you that as well. But I wrote -6.5. That's what my calculator gave me. But any of those equivalent solutions are acceptable also. So again, don't assume that just because you got a decimal for your solution, that your work or answer is wrong. All right, so I did put 2 independent practice problems in here for you to try. Pause the video. There is space down below numbers 6 and 8 where you could try these 2 questions. Start the video when you're ready. All right, so for question number 1, I hope you started by distributing first. 5 times v is 5v, 5 times 9 is 45. So we have 5v minus 45 equals -80. Add 45 to both sides. That's the inverse of subtracting 45. That will get us 5v equals -35. Finally, divide both sides by 5 to get a solution of v equals -7. All right, let's take a look at number 2. Distribute the -3 into the parentheses. So we've got -3 times 2x and -3 times 1. So this will be -6x plus -3 equals -27. The inverse of adding -3 is to add a positive 3. So we will get -6x equals -24. Now we're going to divide both sides by -6. That's the inverse of multiplying by -6. We will get a solution of x equals 4. -24 divided by -6 is +4. All right, hopefully you did pretty well on those, but keep in mind this is something we're going to continue to review and see practice on, plus there is an additional practice sheet you can look at as well. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at number 9. So question number 9, we've got some decimals and fractions mixed in here, but we treat them the same. So let's distribute that 3.2 into the parentheses. 3.2 times x and 3.2 times 3.7. That will get us 3.2x plus 11.84 equals 4.8. Just use those inverse operations. Subtract 11.84 from both sides. And while you're copying these down, take a chance or take some time and make sure that you are doing these problems or practicing these in your calculators. All right, so we subtract 11.84 from both sides. we get 3.2x equals negative 7.04. Divide both sides by 3.2. Negative 7.04 divided by 3.2 is negative 2.2. So you can see we're going to get some decimals or fractions for some of these problems. But again, double check these in your calculators, especially once we see fractions and decimals. If there's something you're not getting, check in with me during office hours or during class. All right, question number 10. Let's distribute this 2/3 into the parentheses. 2/3 times k minus 2/3 times 5. So that's going to be 2/3 k minus 3 1/3 equals negative 4. Now it's possible your calculator may give you minus 10/3, so you might get 10/3 for this, and that's okay too. I would try to keep it as a fraction versus writing it as a decimal, because that will get you 3.3 repeating, which is kind of tricky to plug in or type into the calculator. All right, so let's go ahead and add 3 1/3 to both sides. So you're going to do negative 4 plus 3 1/3. That's the inverse of subtracting 3 1/3. If you don't know how to plug this into your calculator, you definitely want to check in with me. So we get 2/3 k equals negative 2/3. That's from negative 4 plus 3 1/3. Divide both sides by 2/3 since we're multiplying by 2/3. Negative 2/3 divided by positive 2/3 will get us negative 1. Whoops, sorry about that. So even though this problem involved fractions and we had some pretty nasty fractions throughout, we end up getting an integer for our solution. All right, let's move on to our next two, numbers 11 and 12. Number 11, let's distribute this negative 1/5 into the parentheses. So we've got negative 1/5 times b minus negative 1/5 times 15. So that'll be negative 1/5 b minus negative 3. Now I would rewrite that as negative 1/5 b plus 3. I'm going to tell you, I know some of these seem a bit overwhelming. These are probably a bit more challenging than what you'll see on your quiz and your unit test, but you'll definitely see problems like this in the future, especially once you get into high school. The inverse of adding by 3 is to subtract 3. So let's subtract 3 from both sides. So we have negative 1/5 b equals, sorry about that, it keeps moving down on me. We've got negative 10 minus 3, which is going to get us negative 13. Now divide both sides by negative 1/5. Try to make sure it keeps doing that. We're going to divide both sides by negative 1/5. That's really the same as multiplying by negative 5. We end up getting 65 for our solution. So we'll pause there for a second and give you a chance to jot that down. All right, let's take a look at number 12. Let's distribute this 4/5 into the parentheses. We do 4/5 times 10w and 4/5 times 15. So this is going to get us 8w minus 12 equals negative 16. Even though we have that fraction to start, look at how much nicer this problem looks. All right, let's add 12 to both sides. That's going to get us 8w equals negative 4. Negative 16 plus 12 is negative 4. Divide both sides by 8. Again, these steps should be becoming really routine. Make sure, remember, division is not commutative. You want to do negative 4 divided by 8, not 8 divided by negative 4. You will get negative 0.5 or negative 1/2. Doesn't matter how you write your solution, but you will get negative 1/2 or negative 0.5 for your solution here. All right, so I do have a couple more independent practice problems for you to try before we see our last two examples. So go ahead, pause the video, and give these two questions a try that involve decimals and fractions. Okay, hopefully you've taken a look at these. Number 1, let's distribute that 5.2 into the parentheses. So take 5.2 times x and 5.2 times 3.1. That's going to get us 5.2x plus 16.12. Now subtract 16.12 from both sides. That's going to get us 5.2x equals 25.48. Divide both sides by 5.2 to get our solution of x equals 4.9. And keep in mind, you're plugging into your calculators 25.48 divided by 5.2. All right, the second one, we're going to distribute this 3/5 into the parentheses. So 3/5 times 5x and 3/5 times 15. So that's going to get us 3x minus 9 equals negative 15. Add 9 to both sides, we get 3x equals negative 6. Divide both sides by 3. You're going to get a final solution of x equals negative 2. All right. Last two questions. We might get interrupted by the bell because currently it's 2:23 on a Friday afternoon. So if you hear it, we'll pause for a moment and then we'll get started again. So in number 13 and 14, the problems are a little bit more complicated than just distributive property and two-step equation. We're going to have to simplify before we go to solve. But first, in number 13, let's distribute. So remember when we had to simplify things, we want to distribute first. So distribute that 4.1 to the m and to the 4. So that will get us 4.1m plus 16.4, which comes from the 4.1 times 4. And then the minus 2.1m, I already got that situated by adding the opposite and putting plus negative 2.1m equals 6. Now, put your like terms side by side. Keep in mind the 4.1m and the negative 2.1m are like terms. So I put them side by side right here. 4.1 plus negative 2.1 is 2m. So I have 2m plus 16.4 equals 6. Now it's a two-step equation. Subtract 16.4 from both sides. You're going to get 2m equals negative 10.4. Now divide both sides by 2. We will get a final solution of m equals negative 5.2. So we'll give you a moment to copy that down. All right, last question. I think that bell's about to ring. All right, let's go ahead and distribute this negative 3 into the parentheses. So negative 3 times 5 and negative 3 times q. And I'll add the opposite here as well. So we've got 15 equals negative 3 times 5 is negative 15 plus negative 3 times q is negative 3q plus negative 9. Put your like terms, your constants side by side. Looks like maybe they turned off the bells. We'll see. So we've got negative 15 plus negative 9 side by side. We'll highlight those. Negative 15 plus negative 9 is going to get us negative 24. So bring down your plus 3q. Let's get rid of this plus negative 24 by adding 24 to both sides. So we're going to have 39 equals negative 3q. Now finish this off by dividing both sides by negative 3. 39 divided by negative 3 is negative 13. Again, I realize these last probably 4 questions or so were pretty difficult. They're probably going to be a little bit more difficult than what you'll see on a quiz or a test, but I want to prepare you for the future as well. So make sure you have a pretty good understanding of how to solve equations, especially those ones from the front of these guided notes that are just distributive property and solve that two-step equation. We will continue to see some more practice later on this week before our quiz as well. Thanks for listening.